written word. There were flocks of sheep. Resources of food and fiber, sheep became a valuable commodity of any burgeoning society. The number of sheep started slowly in the colonies as early farmers smuggled in a few small flocks beneath the notice of Britain. Britain's manufacturers not only kept a tight rein on wool production in the New World, but dominated the market throughout the world. These small flocks were yet another example of the colonies exercising their defiance and independence leading up to the Revolution. After the American Revolution came change, and soon many small homesteads became mini textile mills. Textile mills, aided by the advent of water-driven mechanizations, began to spring up in the new nation. In the 1800s, a significant number of Americans grew restless. There rose a desire to explore and settle new lands. The flocks of sheep were perfect as a mobile resource of food and clothing. But the great trek westward was not the first gathering of sheep in these remote regions.
There were livestock in the west. Most of them were brought here by the Spanish, the early conquistadores in 1500s. The sheep and cattle and even swine impact was made by a Spanish colonist by the name of Don Juan Onante, who was Basque. He was, I think, in my opinion, the primary one that had an impact on the livestock industry in the western states. But he came in 1598.
Settlements began to emerge throughout the West: California, Texas, Oregon, Washington. Rich, fertile valleys were first explored and small communities grew. Then came a different sort of pioneer, driven from Illinois and Missouri. They were drawn to a valley they believed to be a chosen land, a land they believed given them by God. Mormons congregated in Midwestern staging areas and drove into the frontier with a belief stronger than the dangers in their path.
One of the reasons why Brigham Young brought his followers, the LDS people, out here to Utah was to get away from the United States. Northern Utah was Mexico at the time. But along the way, he got information from early explorers and from fur trappers in particular, and they told him that there were a lot better places to settle than the Salt Lake Valley in terms of agriculture. But they also told him that the Salt Lake Valley was a place between the Shoshone and the Ute peoples, a kind of buffer zone that neither controlled the valley exclusively, and so it made a place where Brigham could come in, set up shop without having to deal immediately with very strong populations of native peoples. Almost immediately after arriving in the Salt Lake Valley, Brigham Young sent out explorers to look for the oasis environments, those areas with water, flat arable land, a reasonable climate, and timber, to create new settlements for his people.
Led by Brigham Young, Mormons brought some livestock and introduced irrigation to desert.
Well, definitely with the Mormons, the retention of livestock, not just sheep, but cattle, and oxen and horses were very important. And they did make an impact on the territory of Utah. The Cotswold sheep was into the United States before the Mormons came to Utah, so they did bring Cotswolds with them to the west.
As a group, the Mormons prospered and grew throughout the state and into Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona, and other states. By the 1860s, they were a flourishing civilization, but with expansion came conflict.
In Utah, you have a couple of different periods of intensified subsistence raiding. The first is the Walker War, 1853-54, and the second is the Black Hawk War, 1863 to 1868. Both of these are periods of kind of unsystematic subsistence raiding on Mormon communities.
When peace came, the flocks continued to grow, with Utah becoming a center stage for new breeds as great numbers of sheep entered the state.
The sheep that's the most common is what's called a Rambouillet, the Merino, or the Finch Rambouillet. They started coming in after the gold rush, and many of the commercial sheep came to Utah via California. And one of the famous flocks, I think it was 30 to 40,000 head, by General Beale, who trailed them from Central California to Wyoming. We start seeing more of other UK breeds being brought into the United States and Utah, such as what's called the Shropshire. And this is a black-faced breed with black legs and a kind of a black hair on the face. It became a very popular breed to replace the farm flock Cotswolds. And then another breed that came in the 30s, the black-faced, black-legged Suffolk breed from England. And this breed is still, to this day, very pronounced and well renowned in Utah as a purebred animal for producing meat-type sheep.
80% of the land in Utah is only grazing land. The sheep industry really took off in the 1880s, 1890s.
From the 1880s to the 1890s, the sheep population in Utah just explodes. You see a rise in numbers in Utah from about 60,000 in 1860 up to 3.8 million after the turn of the century, nearly 4 million sheep.
As herds became larger, the demand for grazing ground resulted in a new confrontation. This time, not between cultures, but between livestock.
Sheep herders were considered itinerant, where cattle ranchers were more stable people that contributed to the community, where sheep herders just kept moving back and forth. But what resulted in those range wars, thousands, literally thousands of sheep during that era were soaked in kerosene and burnt. The herders' dogs usually were hung to the wagon wheels and tied in the herder's shop.
Because geographically, Utah is perfect for raising sheep. You got high summer range, and you've got the winter desert.
As lawmen and legislators stepped in, the conflicts began to fade. In some cases, livestock operations started to integrate.
The beef cattle industry and the sheep industry, in my opinion, are in harmony, and we understand each other very much so. In fact, a lot of sheep people run cattle and vice versa.
With conflict no longer a factor, sheep became the state's undisputed king of agriculture. But on the horizon was a problem greater than disputes with Blackhawks and cattlemen.
By 1900, Utah is really a thoroughly overgrazed environment, particularly in the watersheds of the Wasatch Front, up above the communities from Brigham City all the way down through the Central Valley, Ephraim and Manti, Mount Pleasant. The number of sheep on those watersheds and the damage that they do creates then a period of severe flooding in Utah. Between 1900 and 1920s, there are a series of severe floods. Manti has 20 different floods during that period that come down the canyons through the middle of town, destroying property. Centerville, Farmington, Salt Lake City, all of those canyons have severe floods that occur in the springtime during the melt. And all of that's really attributed to severely overgrazed watersheds.
Heat and wind, not uncommon to the Intermountain West summer. But in the 1930s, the heat was a little warmer and the wind a little stronger. Vast areas of overgrazing had left some of the land bare. The crippled vegetation was no match for the gathering catastrophe. The dust bowls that buried Midwestern farmlands in the 1930s were about to have their impact on Utah.
Well, I think one of the most important things that the sheep industry did, and this is on a national scale, and that was in the beginning of the 20th century, on up through the 1920s, the sheep industry, because it was unregulated, came through in huge transient herds and just stripped the land of vegetation. It was actually Utah sheep raisers that were most responsible for calling attention to that and actually proposed the first legislation in the United States Congress to regulate the public domain.
As grazing became a science and producers took more care of the landscape, the dust literally settled. The sheep producers had weathered another dilemma. Unfortunately, their greatest test was yet to come: the individual tastes and trends of a post-World War II environment.
We had over 56 million sheep, breeding sheep, in the United States. And after World War II, the numbers just started to decline fairly rapidly for a couple of reasons. One was the labor market drew people away for higher paying wages. And there was some difficulty in getting enough good labor to herd sheep and live out in a camp wagon. And then people were more interested in some of the amenities that life offered in the city or town, you know. But the big thing was the lack of demand for lamb meat after World War II.
Somehow, through the conflicts, the dust and the new clothing fabrics, many of these multi-generational operations have survived, and a new cycle begins every spring.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dick.
In northern Nevada, Junior Goring's herds are first gathered off winter range. Many times, winter ranges are large tracts of land isolated from urban developments or federal government land, where grazing is carefully monitored so as not to leave the land barren. Aiding in this quest, government agencies like the USDA not only document grazing impacts, but uses intensive research to develop hardier and more productive plant materials that are utilized in Utah and throughout the world.
Some of our varieties have already gone to other places in the world. China's evaluating them right now, varieties that came out of this lab. Some have gone to Australia, and they're quite interested in them. Canada is using some of them.
In the past, sheep were herded from winter range, feeding along the way. Now trucks haul this livestock, more efficient in that they arrive to their destination sooner, but more costly as energy costs soar. From winter range, the sheep are taken to be sheared. This will be one of two income resources from these flocks. While the wool is widely used by the world consumer, the United States market has been significantly reduced since midway through the 1900s, when fashion moved to lighter fabrics.
Well, we sell to several different buyers throughout the country. There's 5 major buyers in the United States. There's basically only one wool mill left in the United States that we do sell to. But the majority of our wool this year is going to end up overseas, either in China or India.
More reliance on the international market has led to more shipping and more expense. The shearers are quick and thorough. What once was done by the ranchers themselves is handled by a select group of professionals. Sheep are rare in that they need not be destroyed to enjoy the comfort of its coat. Although wool remains a significant part of the wool grower's income, it is second to the sale of lamb for meat. The lamb will grow for a year before being sold. Of all North American livestock, it remains as one of the creatures most vulnerable to predators.
Predation is significant today. We have problems with predation, up to 7% losses in some of the flocks in the western states and Utah. But with the urbanization and sprawl in Utah, I've had a lot more reports with domestic dogs that pack up, get together with a group of other domestic dogs that are uncontrolled, and will take out sheep too.
For most livestock producers, the coyote is the most significant predator. However, increasingly, cougars, bears, and even wolves are becoming livestock predators in the West.
Protecting these sheep are the herders, their dogs, and in some cases, llamas. Herding is an important and at times a lonely profession. When operations outgrew the confines of the family ranch and new range and herders were required, finding these caretakers was not always easy. Today, many Utah ranchers rely on Peruvians. Starting in their youth, these individuals are taught how to care for the flocks while in their native land.
Well, that's how we know a good sheep herder. If the sheep herder's horse is fat, and the lambs are fat, and his camp is clean, then we know he's a good man.
These men come to this country on special work visas. In many cases, they will work for several years, sending money home to make a better life for not only their immediate family, but may provide subsistence and shelter for extended family. The sacrifices they make will leave an impression in their homeland for several generations. Besides the horse and the ever-reliable camp trailer, the herder is partnered with the first line of defense against predators, the dog.
We saw this movement in the 70s and 80s in the Intermountain West particularly of using dogs like the Great Pyrenees, the Akbash, the Anatolian Shepherd as animals to use to protect our flocks and bands.
Como por motivos de que uno está acá con las borregas o las ovejas que van comiendo, como... Bueno, cuando nosotros llegamos acá a la montaña, pues empezamos a cuidarlo, como de tranquilamente dejárselos que coman las ovejas y tener mucho cuidado del oso, del león, de coyotes, de esos animales. Y además tenemos en las ovejas perros blancos, ellos que protegen de los animales feroces, esquinada. Eso es todo.
Although there are a few breeds preferred over others, the herder's friend comes in a variety of shapes. They are raised and trained to protect and gather the flock. However, dogs are not exclusive to this task.
We found that the llama, which is a South American camelid, was a very good animal to use as a guard animal. The guard llamas are really working.
As the long summer progresses, the sheepmen consider the economic uncertainty of the coming year.
If somehow or other, if we could stabilize the volatility, these prices, both in wool and lamb, have been extremely volatile. And let me give you an example. And my lambs were getting heavy, so I was sort of forced to sell them. I lost $6 a head on them. If I'd have had those lambs 1 week later and sold them on the market, I would have broke even.
When you can't fulfill your financial obligations, you better get out. And so far we've been blessed. We haven't come to that point.
You ever come close?
You always come close. You always come close. We're just a few months from poverty.
But to the Utah wool grower, there's more than just the business side.
I love the forest. I love the trees. I love the shrubs. I love the grasses and plants. I love the wildlife. I see moose and I see bear. I see all types of wildlife up there, and it's a joy to see them.
The people that make up the American sheep industry are those people who raise sheep or for whatever reason, I don't know, but they're some of the finest people that anyone would ever meet.
Utah is a place with very strong agrarian roots and strong agrarian values. The LDS community itself initially based on an agricultural economy.
Oh, there's nothing to compare to it when you can take your children and your grandchildren and take them out and show them how to work with your hands, and like my wife says, to get cold and to get uncomfortable and know that you're going to survive, and it makes you appreciate when you are warm and comfortable.
Well, if I'm out on the farm or the lambing sheds, I can see these mountains in the background, well, it just fills my heart with pride and joy, I guess, to see that.
When fall comes, the lambs have grown, and to achieve the peak price, these animals will be sold during a very narrow time period. If other international producers have a poor year, the Utah sheepman does well.
If the lambs are over 14 months of age, then they're not lamb, they become mutton. And the price drops significantly.
And then, sometime after the first of the year, new life begins, and with it, a new responsibility.
As far as having the opportunity to go out and work close to the animals and to the outdoors and teach these children that you have a stewardship to take care of your animals and of your property, of your grounds, of the feed and of the environment, that there is more to it than just making money.
An uncertain market is and will always be a part of the wool grower's life. But the greatest threat to the modern rancher is diminishing space for grazing.
Well, I think, as I say, encroachment of the city is probably the biggest challenge.
You have this explosion of population, this post-war baby boom that leads to a housing boom, which leads to the suburbanization of America, and particularly of Utah, and the expansion of suburbs into what were the most productive lands, agricultural lands in Utah, right under the benches.
In the Salt Lake Valley, Davis County, places like that were once really had incredible agricultural base. There's no farms left.
The challenges in Utah, number one to me right now, is urban sprawl.
I think a lot in the West, there's a lot of pressure to sell out just because of land values increasing in subdivisions.
What is the future for Utah wool growers?
Some people call the raising of sheep in our country, a dying activity, an industry that's on its way out. On the contrary, the last 2 years in the United States, sheep numbers have increased.
When I teach rural history class, we start reading from the colonial period to the present, and we're reading histories that talk about the decline of the family farm and the decline of an ideal family farm over time. And the students again and again and again read books that this book says, well, the family farm disappears in the 1830s. And no, it's right after the Civil War, the family farm then disappears. No, at the turn of the century, the family farm's gone. No, it's after World War II, and here the family farm is gone, and agriculture has become a corporate enterprise. I think they start to say to themselves, well, all of these historians saying, here's the end of the family farm, yet the next historian says, no, here it is, and here's when it declines.
The future of agriculture, I think, is bright. I don't think anybody's ever going to get rich on it.
I think what we see is a continuation of family farms in different formats, perhaps larger and much more corporate, but still families working together, working the land, and contributing greatly to American society, well out of proportion to their percentage of the population.
17, open the gate, let him go. 17, 18, 19, and $18.19. You're out again, sir. 19. I'm at $18.19. $16, $16.09, $1,600. $1,000. Right here, $1,000. Number